Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Appraisal Buzzcast. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe below and get notified as soon as the latest Buzzcast drops. Today, we'll be speaking with Joan Trice, CEO of Allterra Group, and Nikki Smith of Tucson Real Estate Appraisal. We'll be discussing a topic that is on every appraiser's mind: market value versus sales price. With the market the way it is, every appraiser should be tuned in closely for this one. Joan, I'll hand it over to you.
Nikki, welcome. And I just wanted to share with our audience today that I actually met you via a Facebook group, and I glommed onto your comment about market value because I don't know if you started the discussion or somebody else did, but in the market that we're in today, which could be perceived by many in many markets to be frothy, what do you think appraisers ought to be paying attention to when it comes to the definition of market value?
So there are different parts to market value. So a lot of people think that it's just whatever a buyer's willing to pay or whatever buyers are willing to pay. But that's really just one part of the definition of market value. And I think a lot of people don't realize that there are certain conditions required for market value. And so, yeah, I think appraisers need to be paying attention to what those conditions are to discern whether or not this is actually, the contract that they have in front of them, if that's actually market value or not.
Yeah, well, what I'm seeing and where I start getting nervous is when appraisers just say, well, it's a meeting of the minds. The buyer and the seller had an agreement. And therefore it must be market value. That's the definition. And so you're saying, well, it's just one part of it. There are other tests to that definition. And, I know you're a fairly new appraiser, so I don't know if you learned in your training, but the definition of market value in FIREA put in place in 1989 was actually a modification of a prior definition that said the highest possible price.
Right.
The new definition in 1989 is the most probable price.
Right.
So
and that's
if you're
what I
selecting, and the realtor's job, everybody's constantly complaining about the yin and yang between realtors and appraisers. To me, it's natural. So the realtor's job is to ensure that their client gets the highest possible price for their property.
Right. Yep. That is their job.
It's a natural conflict. Yes. Your job is to estimate market value, the most probable price, not the highest price. So right out of the gate, it seems like most contracts shouldn't be reflected on the appraisal.
Right. Unless you have a really, there are a lot of seasoned, smart agents out there who understand that the highest price is not necessarily going to be market value. And I've even dealt with some agents where they said, hey, I know this market's crazy. I know we're over list price. I know the highest sale in this neighborhood is not that, but do what you can. I've had agents understand that's where we're at. And that's kind of where a lot of those appraisal addendums are, where they will pay the difference between what the appraisal comes in at and their contract.
Right. Yeah. If you're going to buy a house today, you better come to the table with cash. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. But definitely the most probable price. And I often reiterate that in my report, especially when I know I'm not going to come in at the contract price. I put that in my commentary in the conclusion of value saying, hey, I understand that there was a willing buyer and a willing seller, and you guys had a meeting of the minds and came to this contract price. However, the definition of market value is the most probable price that a property should bring in, given a certain set of conditions in a competitive market, which is, a typically motivated buyer and seller, that the parties are both well informed and well advised, which I've had that one kind of.
Yeah, you can always question that. There's your loophole, right? Yeah.
I've had some where I'm like, these people are not informed.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Nikki, let's do this. Let's break for a commercial message. And then when we come back, we'll talk about the other components of the definition of market value. So, Jim?
Appraisers, if you've grown frustrated with endlessly pursuing new appraisal work and not reaping any of the benefits, Metro West is here to help. They understand and work to alleviate the pain points commonly felt by appraisers to enable personal and financial growth for their staff. After all, they've been owned and operated by appraisers since the company opened in 1987. Metro West Appraisal is an equal opportunity employer, and they're always looking for certified residential real estate appraisers to join their team. Visit metrowestappr.com/careers or email careers@metrowestappr.com. Joan, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So, Nikki, we've already covered, the first tenet, buyer and seller typically motivated. I'm not even sure that motivations in a supply demand imbalance
Yes.
are typically motivated. The second one, both parties are well informed and well advised and acting in their own best interests. That's a rather nebulous one.
Yes.
And certainly not one that an appraiser can work with much, because you can't get inside somebody's head particularly. But
Yes.
so let's move on to number 3, because this one's interesting. A reasonable time is allowed for exposure in the open market. So when you look at a contract of sale, I presume through MLS, you know how many days it was on the market.
Yeah. And a lot of times it's one day, that day.
So one day and 20 offers.
And 20 offers.
So how in the world now? I know.
Is that a reasonable time? I guess.
Well, if it were 48-hour time, the price would just continue to escalate, possibly. So that one's not even in a rapidly rising market. That one's not even meaningful. So the fourth one just kind of makes me chuckle. Payment in terms of cash or its equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing equivalent to cash.
No, that's true. They're going to take a cash buyer over somebody with financing all the time.
I know. So where I'm leading up to is this definition needs to be modernized. There's lots of flaws in the definition.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. A lot of times when I use comparables and I see, a sales price, that it's sold kind of high for the neighborhood. And I said, the first thing I think is that that's a cash buyer. Like, that's the first thing I think. And I checked the MLS and sure enough, it was a cash buyer. They don't have to go through the appraisal process. They could skip all that. They just pay whatever they want. So,
right, exactly. And that's the problem. If you're using those as comps and they were all cash, there's no financing. So how do you adjust? I mean, this is part of
that's
practice we really haven't even talked about much. So here's the one that's always problematic for me, and that's the fifth tenet. The price represents the normal consideration for the property sold, unaffected by special or creative financing or seller concessions granted by anyone associated with the sale. Mm-hmm. Well, unaffected by, so is the Fed's helicopter money and subsidized interest rate stimulus
considered creative financing?
Is that also undue stimulus?
Yeah, that's a good question.
An appraiser measure it. These are
right. You can't
questions.
That I exactly
to answer, but it's more of a rhetorical question. There's nothing in appraisal practice or education today that says, okay, appraiser, you've got this crazy market. You need to be adjusting for subsidized interest rates because that's driving up prices.
Yeah. I mean, we can only adjust for what data we have, you know what I mean? So you can't just make an adjustment and you have no data to back it up. And a lot of times there might be things behind the scenes that we don't know. I mean, I guess that's where talking to agents helps. And a lot of times I'll call and say, hey, tell me a little bit about your buyer. What were they thinking? Where were they looking? What was their motivation? And a lot of times I'll find out, a lot about the buyer's circumstances, saying, oh, this buyer, she put in 20 offers already and didn't get anything. And, they're from out of state. And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. So then you kind of start understanding. Yep. You start understanding the mind of the buyer a little bit. And that kind of helps you just kind of back up your opinion of value to reconcile it to what the market value actually is. So, yeah.
Interesting.
That's what I do.
It's a challenge for field appraisers, I know. Let me take another break with Jim. And when we come back, so while we're taking this break, I want you to think about, should we really be doing 3 approaches to value and reconciling those final conclusion? Jim?
When was the last time you wanted to work more for less money? The appraisal industry is headed that way. You have to do more for the same amount of money, and now you have less time for yourself. DataMaster can change that. With their easy-to-use software, DataMaster lets you spend more time analyzing and less time typing. Plus, you get more information than the other data import products. Head to www.datamasterusa.com/buzz for more information and to learn how you can save up to an hour per report. Joan?
Thank you, Jim. So, Nikki, you've had all that time to think about 3 approaches to value. And I'm a big supporter of developing all 3. And for this kind of reason, when you get in a crazy market and all you're doing is the sale price approach to value, you end up in a momentum situation, almost like the GameStop stock situation where you're chasing it.
Yeah.
And so as an appraiser, do you think we should be doing 3 approaches to value?
So, in my market, it depends. USPAP says you need to develop and use whatever recognized methodology or technique necessary for credible appraisal, credible assignment result. And so, if I'm in downtown and most of those houses are 80, 90, 100 plus years old, cost approach doesn't make sense.
Right.
Right?
No, I totally get that.
But, if I'm in a market saturated with where owners it's not primarily owner occupied, where there's a lot of renters, then obviously, I'm going to do the income approach as well as the sales comparison. What I found generally is that when I do all 3 approaches, I tend to find that they obviously never match, but I do find that they correlate. So if I am in an increasing market, especially right now with building costs just skyrocketing as well, a lot of times I find like the cost to build is just ridiculously high.
Yeah.
So I do find like a correlation a lot of times between the 3 approaches, but they're kind of like a graph with 3 bar lines. You see them moving kind of together, but they're usually at different points kind of on the graph. But I think it's definitely helpful to see. I mean, you can definitely see where, a lot of the market appreciation has happened too when you do all 3 approaches to value. You can see the differences. Like I just did one last night, actually. It was a condo, and the income approach told me 215. The sales comparison approach told me 240. So it's like, where do I reconcile that? Now this market is, condominiums here, a lot of times they are rented out. And so, I have to reconcile, those 2 things. And so, I think it definitely is helpful to at least consider all 3 approaches if you can, if it makes sense for your subject.
Are rents going up at the same rate as sale prices? Are you seeing that also starting to get?
Yeah, I am seeing rents going up, but I feel like a lot of times the rents, I feel like sometimes people are being greedy. I'm like, no, okay, it didn't go up that much. You know what I mean? Like people are just asking because they can.
Right. They
instead
go
of
up
really
in big
seeing.
leagues, is what you're saying.
Right, exactly. I'm like, wait, no, this is not, this is not $2,500 a month. This is not that big of a property, But people are still paying for it because just the market, especially here, they can't build them fast enough, and there's a housing shortage, and people, they've got to find a place to live, and if they're kind of shut out of the buying market because prices are too crazy, well, then they're relegated to the rental market, and you're going to kind of find competition there too. So that's kind of escalating rental prices as well, I've seen.
Yeah, I really think this is a topic that needs some really deep thought put around it. I do believe that the definition of market value needs to be updated and modernized, because we have devolved the appraisal process down to, I call the sales comparison approach the greater fool theory.
Who's willing to
Knucklehead.
pay more?
Yeah, what did some knucklehead pay for it yesterday is really not a measure of value. And the analogy I always use these days is the meme stocks like GameStop, and the analysts, and insert appraiser when I say analyst. The analysts are saying the stock value is about $10 a share, but the price is at over $200 a share. So the difference between price and value is speculative value.
Right.
And appraisers haven't been trained. Like I said, there's no education on this topic about.
Well, no, that's a completely
speculative part. Right.
Right. No, that's a completely different type of appraisal product. I mean, now you're asking for forecasting, and you're going to need forecasting models and a whole different set of hypothetical, assumptions and extraordinary assumptions to try to anticipate what the value of something today will be in the future. But that's not, most of my clients are lender clients. They're not asking for the speculative value. They're wanting to know what it's worth as of a specific day.
And isn't that a little silly? We're making 30-year loans, and you only want to know what it's worth on day one.
Yep.
Not next year.
Yeah.
They only care when the loan goes into default. It's like, oh man, we should take a look at that. Oh, look, it's not worth what they paid for it. How did they?
Yeah. And that's where, periodic, I'm sure, a lot of lenders have periodic appraisals or evaluations or whatever, just to see if the subject property has appreciated or depreciated. I'll get updates. I've gotten a few updates requests for an updated appraisal. If I did the appraisal more than, I think it's 90 or 120 days, I can't remember the exact time frame, but I've gotten a fair amount of those too.
Right, exactly. Well, interesting. Well, thank you for the conversation today. It's just nice to start the conversation. I don't propose that I have any solutions other than we really need to take a close look at this, because otherwise we're just going to keep repeating these cycles, and it's starting to feel a little 2005 and 6-ish to me. And
although it's weird, the circumstances are a little bit different. It does feel that way, but it seems like people who are paying now, they've got the money, they're putting down the cash.
There's a lot of cash sloshing around, and that's quite evident. But that's also very unfortunate for the affordable housing sector.
Yes,
those folks don't have cash.
No.
And if you don't have cash in this market, it's almost impossible to buy a house.
Yeah.
That's why having frothy markets is a very uneven, unfair system, I think. Sadly.
Yeah.
Well, it was very nice meeting you. Thanks for joining us today. And
it's my pleasure.
And hopefully we can have you back and keep this conversation going.
I'd love that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. You did a great job.
Thanks, Joan.
Stuck in the appraisal management technology dark ages, using spreadsheets or antiquated software? You should meet Evo. Evo is the most innovative appraisal management technology on the market, trusted by lenders and AMCs and is loaded with mind-blowing features like sophisticated decisioning algorithms to select the best appraiser for each order, the ability to configure forms and fields in real time, a user role-based design, and the industry's only compliance guarantee. Find out more at globaldms.com or call 877-866-2747. Joan and Nikki, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for our listeners for joining us, as well as the sponsors for helping us to keep putting these together for you. If you have an idea for a future Buzzcast or would like to be interviewed, reach out to us at info@appraisalbuzz.com and head over to the forums at appraisalbuzz.com and let us know how you feel about the market value in your corner of the country. Have a great day, everyone.